Hello, welcome back. It's the end of August. That means it's time for me to take a little look back. Films I've watched this month. Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. My name is Mr. Paul Mount. Yes, it's episode 3 in my new series where I look back at the films I've watched over the last 4 weeks, 28 days, 31 days, or whatever number of days there are in the month. I'm doing this, as many of you know, because I don't really do much in the way of new film reviews on this channel because, to be honest, hardly anybody watched them. But I do like to talk about the new films and the movies I've watched, so I thought I would do this little compilation at the end of the month where I will talk just for a few minutes about the films I've watched in the cinema or theatre, downloads, streaming, and even a little bit of physical media. It's all here. So let's jet back through the month and see what films I've been watching. Before we do that, though, let me say very welcome to this channel if you're new here, if you've just stumbled across this video. Very nice if you stick around. At the moment, 49% of people who watch this channel aren't subscribed, which I think is not bad by YouTube standards. But just imagine a world in which that 49% also subscribe to the channel. It would certainly bump up my subscriber numbers, which have ground to a halt again lately. But of course you don't have to subscribe, but if you want to, you can click like and subscribe there. There's a QR code there you can click with your phone. Easy peasy, you're part of my world of stuff, and who wouldn't want to be? So this month has been a mixed bag of films, about 12 films I think in all. Obviously, July was the big month for the big blockbuster movies, your Superman and Fantastic Four, and all those big box office bonanza films, none of which have done incredibly well, it has to be said. So this month was slightly less high profile, but there were actually some rather good films released this month, particularly in the sort of horror genre. And I think horror being fairly low budget films, I think I mentioned before on this channel, they tend to stand a better chance of doing well at the box office because they don't have to make stupid amounts of money to recoup the costs. And often you find in horror films some quite imaginative ideas and some quite eerie images and storylines. I think this month in particular we've got 2 outstanding horror films, at least one of which is easily going to be my top 10 films of the year. But before that, I want to talk about 2 films which I have done videos for on the channel, retro films. Just want to briefly mention them as a sort of scoop because I did watch them during the month. I'm talking about Night of the Demons, first of all, 1957 British horror film starring Dana Andrews. There's a full video on the film further back up the channel, so please take a look at that. A brilliant, very underrated film, very eerie, very creepy. A film that was made in difficult circumstances because some of the creators were pulling in different directions. But it is still a genuinely chilling sort of occult horror film. Well worth seeing if you've never seen it. And, as I did mention in my video, and several people did point out, it gave birth to a classic line of dialogue in the seance sequence.
It's in the trees. It's coming.
That's the one, which was sampled by the great Kate Bush in her 1985 song The Hounds of Love, the title track from her album, which became a hit single in its own right. And as I recall, I gave Night of the Demon a big fat 9 out of 10. I also watched Creature from the Black Lagoon from 1954, one of the classic, oft forgotten Universal horror movies, a masterpiece of a film which still works very well. It's nice and tight, lean storyline, very effective creature design, great performance, and you do genuinely forget that there's a man in this costume. It's so well rendered and so well, and I mean rendered not in the sense of CGI, but it's so well performed. Brilliant undersea filming. Creature from the Black Lagoon also earned a 9 out of 10 for me. There's a video at the back of the channel. Talking of vintage films, I also watched, for no apparent reason, I just stumbled across it on one of the streaming services. I watched a film from 1957, a Roger Corman film called Attack of the Crab Monsters. This wasn't a hugely distinguished film, but it ran to just over an hour, so it passed the time one evening at the beginning of the month. This film starred Richard Garland, Pamela Duncan and Russell Johnson, and it was about a second scientific expedition that returned to a remote Pacific island to discover what happened to the scientists who made up the first expedition. When they get there, they eventually discover that the island is inhabited by a pair of radiation-mutated giant crabs that not only consume the members of the first expedition, but absorb their minds, and they now plan to reproduce their kind and spread across the world. This is one of those films that were very popular in the 1950s, those post-nuclear bomb films, post-Hiroshima, where the world didn't really yet understand the effects of nuclear fallout and radiation. And there were a lot of horror science fiction films at the time postulated the idea that all sorts of creatures and creepy crawlies would swell to enormous proportions and terrorize the human race. This is not a bad, fun little film for a Roger Corman cheapie. The effects are quite good. It's about an hour long, so it doesn't drag its heels, and the crab creatures are quite well done for what they are. So I think I found it on Amazon Prime, so if you fancy catching a dose of crabs, then check that one out online now. I give that one 5 out of 10. Right, looking back at other films that I watched during the month, and I have to throw my hat into the ring talking about War of the Worlds. This one debuted on Amazon on the 30th of July, and I watched it, I think, on the 1st of August. A film that had been in limbo for 2 or 3 years, made during the pandemic, and I can only agree with all those reviews who have absolutely dismembered this film because it is dreadful. Shockingly bad. I mean, War of the Worlds, being an H.G. Wells story, is out of copyright now because it's 50 years since he passed away, so his stories are all fair game for any aspiring or incompetent filmmaker to have a crack at, and this is a pretty incompetent effort. I won't talk too much about it. It sat on the shelf for about 3 years because, as I said, it was made in 2021 during the pandemic. Why on earth Amazon felt they needed to put it out now, I have no idea. But it's what they call a screen life science fiction film. I hadn't heard that expression before. This is a term that is used to describe films which portray all their action on computer screens. People on a computer screen or people watching computer screens. Terribly dreary way to tell a story. And so it was with this terrible version of War of the Worlds. It stars the rapper Ice Cube, who also popped up in another film I watched this month. He plays Will Radford. He's a computer operative for the Department of Homeland Security in America. And he spends his time sitting at a computer screen just observing things, mainly prying on his family, which is a bit weird. His pregnant daughter, his mysterious conspiracy theorist son. And while he's watching them and watching the world is bombarded by meteors from which emerge these tripod-type creatures which storm across the planet. The action then is relayed by the people that he's watching on the screen. And we get some decent actors in this. Eva Longoria from Desperate Housewives, Clark Gregg from the Marvel film and TV series, obviously desperate for a bit of work during the pandemic because we constantly see scenes of them in rooms talking earnestly to the camera or running through streets while the camera is wobbling as things are supposed to be going on. It's an awful, awful film. Not just because of the screen time concept, which is pretty shonky, but it's just so badly done. The script is terrible. Ice Cube, I'm not saying he's a bad actor, but he's a bad actor in this. I don't think he's particularly comfortable with the idea of sitting in a room looking at a screen for 90 minutes, although he does sort of move about a bit later on. It's a shockingly bad film. It really is very, very bad. And I'm going to give it 1 out of 10, purely for the fact that there are some, in fact, quite decent designs of the tripod creatures, which are a little bit similar to the ones in the BBC's 1980s series. Video on that further back on the channel, in that they have the same sort of look with the cap type thing and the legs and things. We don't see much of them, obviously, in the film because of the style of it, but it's not a good film by any reasonable standards. So yeah, that one gets from me a big chunky 1 out of 10. I went to see The Naked Gun, the reboot of the legendary 1980s comedy series starring Leslie Nielsen, which spun off from the short-lived Police Squad series. And it's quite good fun. It's had slightly iffy reviews. People either really like it or they really detest it. I really liked it because it was quite nice to go to the cinema to see that sort of silly humour on screen again. Silly slapstick things, daft plays on words, visual gags. And I laughed at it more than I didn't laugh at it. There's a certain critic who has said, I laughed once at this film, and he constantly asks other people how many times they laughed at this film. I don't know how many times I laughed at it, but I laughed at it quite a lot because it is funny and it's silly and it's daft. And we haven't had that sort of thing for quite a while. It doesn't quite reach the standard of the originals, of course, but I think Leslie Nielsen displays a largely hitherto unsuspected comic timing, which works quite well. And Pamela Anderson, who is his co-star in the film, she is very good. She plays up to him very well, and they have a rapport and a chemistry on screen. It's daft, it's silly. There's a mid-film sequence which goes off at a completely wild tangent, which is very funny, but it's got all the things you want from a Naked Gun film. It is about 85 minutes. And actually, that seems a bit long. I think it sort of wears out its welcome a little bit around the hour mark because it's so relentlessly throwing out stuff that you do get a bit exhausted. But I say poo to the people who are too humorless to understand this or enjoy this. It's just a bit of knockabout fun, and it's reinvigorated this franchise. I don't know if we'll see any more of it. Liam Neeson himself has said, as far as he's concerned, it's a one and done, but it's done reasonably well at the box office. Wouldn't be surprised if they do churn out a sequel, but then again, I wouldn't be surprised if they don't. I enjoyed The Naked Gun, though, I have to say, and I'm going to give that 7 out of 10. I also went to see Nobody, which came out just a few weeks ago. This is a sequel to the original Nobody from 2021, starring Bob Odenkirk, who, as you may recall, plays Hutch Mansell. He seems to be an everyday, rather boring bloke, but he's got a secret life. He's a top assassin who's sent on missions to dispatch bad guys. That was the USP of the first film, and when I heard there was a sequel coming, I thought, well, what else do you do with that? Once you've blown that secret, that concept, where do you go with this particular idea? And I think they pulled it off quite well in this particular film. Again, it's only 90 minutes, so it just gets on with it. But the concept behind this film is that Hutch is still doing what he does, but he is drifting away from his family a little bit. His wife, Becca, played by Connie Nielsen, who has a bit more to do in this film. And he decides to reconnect with them by going on holiday. And he takes them on holiday to this rather run-down holiday camp where his father once took him on holiday, because he only ever went on holiday with his father, played by Christopher Lloyd, who's back in this one. When he gets there, he almost immediately rubs somebody up the wrong way and gets into a bit of a scrap, and soon he finds himself crossing paths with a local drug dealer, Lendina, played by Sharon Stone, who's having a hell of a time with this. It's the first film reheated in a way. The violence, I think, is up a notch in terms of the scope and scale and frequency of it, but there are some good kinetic fight sequences, lots of guns going off and shooting and people randomly being killed right, left and centre. And it all ends up with this huge climax at the theme park, which has more than a little bit of Home Alone about it. Perfectly agreeable. I mean, it was unnecessary in a way. I didn't need to see this film being made. But I do like Bob Odenkirk, a bit of a hero from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, which reminds me, I haven't finished Better Call Saul. I've still got the last season to watch. But it's good, well, I say good nature, there's a lot of killing and gouging in it, but it's good fun if you want a bit of splatter-filmed blood and guts, fighting and shooting, then Nobody's very good. I don't know if they will do a third. This one has been struggling at the box office. I don't think it's covered its costs yet in terms of its production, and the first one didn't do so well that it would suggest a long-running franchise, so this could be the last we see of Hutch Mansell. But all in all, I enjoyed it, and I get 7.5 out of 10. Talking about horror films, then, I mentioned about horror and how productive and inventive that is at the moment, and there are two particularly good films I've seen in the last month, and if you are strong of stomach, they're both highly recommended. The first of them is called Together. It's described as a supernatural body horror film written and directed by Michael Shanks. Now, when I heard it was Michael Shanks, I thought, blimey, he was the bloke in Stargate SG-1. Wow, he's done well, but it's not him. It's a different bloke. It's a younger Michael Shanks from Australia. And in fact, like last month's Bring Her Back film, which was filmed and shot in Australia, this is also shot in Australia. And even though it's set in America, this has been described, and it's something I've noticed with horror films, it's almost as if to justify the fact you're watching a horror film, people seem to focus on what this really is all about, the deep subtext and what it says about what it means to be human and so on. Sometimes you just want to watch a horror film and just, wow, that's gory, or, ooh, that's a bit creepy. But there is a subtext to Together, I have to admit, and it's a very interesting one about codependency and neediness in relationships, and how sometimes people in relationships probably shouldn't be, but they just jog along because it's easier to be in that relationship than not be in it. It stars the real-life husband and wife team of Dave Franco and Alison Brie. You see their real-life chemistry on screen from the moment the film starts. They play Tim and Millie. They're a young couple who are just ambling along in this relationship that neither of them have got the guts to really get out of, even though it's not particularly going anywhere. Millie gets a job as a teacher at the new school out in the sticks. Tim, despite the fact he's in his early to mid-30s, he still has aspirations to become a rock star, and he goes off to do gigs with this rather low-rent garage band. But he's never going to be a rock star, and you sort of think he probably knows that deep down, but he still has this dream. Millie's more grounded. She's got a career. Tim goes with her. they hope that this will reinvigorate their relationship, because at their leaving party, Millie proposed to Tim and he didn't respond the way she might have hoped. It made them both question their relationship. But when they move away, they both appear to be willing and able to give the relationship another shot. They're investigating their new environment, their new home area, and they get caught in a huge thunderstorm. And in trying to find somewhere to shelter, they fall into this pit, this cave, which is dank and grimy and fetid and creepy. They stay there overnight. When they wake up in the morning, something sort of fungal seems to have sort of stuck their legs together. They pull themselves apart. They manage to get out of the cave. Something very strange has happened, however. Tim is suddenly can't bear to be away from Millie, and he wants to be with her all the time. He's drawn to her, and they start to bond in very strange, very physical and quite painful ways. This is a very unusual film. I really enjoyed this because it's strange and it's eerie, and there's something supernatural going on down in this pit which has caused what happens to them. But you can't argue against the fact it's got this theme in it about these relationships that outlive their purpose, and yet people can't get away from them, and how sometimes people do end up together perhaps when they shouldn't be. Together ends up very literally. Really good, very clever, very well directed, and I look forward to seeing more from Mr. Michael Shanks, not the one from Stargate. I gave Together 8 out of 10. More striking again, however, is Weapons, which is in cinemas now. This was directed by Zach Cregger, who directed Barbarian, which I think is on Netflix at the moment, or has never arrived on physical media, which is of some frustration. This is a very clever film. I think you only realise exactly how clever it is when you've seen it and you think about it, because when I saw it, there were certain things about it I thought, well, that didn't make sense. What's that got to do with this? And what's the background behind what's actually going on? But when you do stop and think about it, the pieces are all there. It's a jigsaw. You can put it together because of its non-linear structure. The story is about a bunch of kids who disappear from a classroom overnight. They just vanish. Nobody knows where they've gone. They don't appear to turn up again. But suspicion falls on the classroom's teacher, Justine Gandy, played by Julia Garner, who you will also see as the Silver Surfer in the Fantastic Four film at the moment. The town is on edge. The kids have vanished. Nobody knows why. The spotlight is on Justine. She gets on the wrong end of a lot of aggression from the locals. And the story sort of resolves itself by telling its narrative in chunks, 3 or 4 different chunks that go back to what happened earlier, how things all come together to lead to this event. It's very clever, very, very clever puzzle box filmmaking, because each different section that focuses on a slightly different character reveals a little bit more about what's happened and how it's happened and how this situation came to be and who sort of causes it. It's the who causes it that slightly wrong-footed me at the end of the film, because I didn't quite connect all the bits of the plot. But when you do, when you stop and you do have to think about it, I think, when you've seen it, to make it all fit together, and you do have to make some leaps of faith in terms of the story, but it's really very well put together. Again, there's some sort of gory visuals and very striking stuff, and there are some quite comedic bits. I think certainly in the last reel, it suddenly went into place. You thought, is this supposed to be as funny as it is? Because it does look quite funny. Not in the way that Ari Aster's Hereditary, for example, became a sitcom at the end. For me, the last 10 minutes were ludicrous. This presents some imagery and things happening which are amusing within the context of the story, but it's probably sort of mordant black humour rather than an attempt to be funny in itself. But it's an excellent film, very, very well put together. And again, I think in Zach Cregger we have an interesting new talent in horror, and I think that both he and Michael Shanks are far, far more talented than the hugely overrated Ari Aster, whose latest film, I am pleased to see, hasn't done very well. That means he's had about 2 or 3 flops in a row. So maybe the studios will stop throwing money at people like him and just direct it more to people who've got real vision and real ideas. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now. Weapons gets from me a massive 9 out of 10 and is in cinemas now, as many of these films still are. Certainly some of them are coming to the end of their runs, but they're all still out there now. Weapons, though, is a 9 out of 10 film. You need to see it, and it'll be in my top 10 come Christmas. As indeed may be The Life of Chuck, which I saw last week. This is based on a Stephen King short story. It's directed by the very prolific Mike Flanagan, who's done a lot of very impressive genre work on TV. And this came out in America a couple of months ago and fell flat on its face and sort of disappeared. It's now out in the UK. It's getting a better reception over here. I don't think it's going to be a particular hit. But this is a very, very striking film, very impressive visually and very thought-provoking and very memorable. It is almost a work of art, I would say, in terms of its look and its visual palette and its very unusual story. Like Weapons, in fact, it's told in chunks, different sections, but these are all slightly separate sections that represent moments or times in the life of Chuck, played by Tom Hiddleston, who appears briefly in the first segment. In the second segment, he's in it pretty much all the way through, and we see a younger version of him in the first segment. It's basically, as it says, the life of Chuck, and the first piece of the film introduces us to the teacher character played by Chiwetel Ejiofor. He's divorced from Karen Gillan's character, and something strange is happening. The world isn't quite right. There are terrible natural disasters all over the world. They've noticed that the days seem to be getting shorter, and this strange image of this man, somebody called Chuck, appears on people's TV screens and in the air, and people don't know who Chuck is, but they're all saying, "You did a wonderful job, Chuck. You've had a fantastic life." And this doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. The universe is dying, stars are collapsing and vanishing from the sky. It's clear that the end of days is here. What this is all about, we don't really know until we get into maybe the second story, when we meet Tom Hiddleston's Chuck, who is a businessman at a meeting, a conference, and he's just walking through the streets of the town where the conference is taking place, and he sees a young street musician playing the drums, and he can't stop himself dancing. And he and another woman passing by who's just been dumped by a boyfriend, they have this experience where they just dance carelessly and without thought and live in the moment. And I think that's what this particular segment is all about, because we hear, as the film goes on, courtesy of a narration which threads through the film, that Chuck is in a certain place at the time and all this is going on, a certain condition. The narration is actually voiced by Nick Offerman. You just recognise his voice if you're familiar with Parks and Recreation. He's got that sort of slightly deadpan, wry tone of voice which really suits the narration and the information that he's putting across to the audience. The third segment of the film takes us back to Chuck's early days, and it sort of establishes his connection to dancing, which links to the central part of the film. It's hard to know what to say about this film. It's not even something you can necessarily spoil. I don't think I've said things that spoil it, because I think you need to watch it and then think about it, what it was. It's basically one man's journey through life. But I thought it was really unusual and very memorable and quite haunting in a strange way. Quite sad, quite upbeat. It's one of those films that's sad and joyous at the same time. I thought it was really very well done, and it probably will be in my top 10 at the end of the year. Life of Chuck is in cinemas now. Probably won't be around for long, so if you want to see it, move. 8 out of 10. Nearly there. I also finally caught up with a film which came out earlier this year, a very low-budget British film, which I intended to see, but it was only in cinemas for about a week, and by the time I got round to trying to book a ticket for it, it had gone. It's called Hallow Road. One of the things about many of these films this month is they're quite short. Films seem to be either getting very long or getting very short. But it's quite nice to watch this because the credits start to roll at about 73 minutes. A very short, sharp, psychological horror film. It has elements of sort of folk horror about it. It's directed by Babak Anvari and is written by William Gillies and stars Rosamund Pike and Matthew Rhys. They're the two main only cast members, I suppose. And it starts at 2 a.m. in a family home, and the camera sort of tracks through the house, and we see that something sort of happened. It's almost like a Marie Celeste situation with an abandoned meal, smashed glass on the floor. Something dramatic has happened here. Maddie, played by Rosamund Pike, she's woken up by the sound of fire alarm that's beeping away. The battery's run down, so she tries to change the battery. As she does so, she gets a phone call from her 18-year-old daughter, Alice. And we discover, as the husband, Frank, wakes up and tries to find out what's going on, that there's been a family meal, there's been a massive row, and Alice has stormed out, stealing the father's car. She's driven off into the night, but she's had an accident in a remote area called Hallow Road. She's knocked over a young girl. As a paramedic, Maddie tries to give Alice advice about what to do to the girl. The parents get into Maddie's car and drive off to help. And a lot of the film takes place with them in the car, fielding messages from Alice as she gets increasingly desperate and increasingly panicky. And Maddie and Frank both give opposing advice about what they think Alice should do to try and resolve or improve the situation, because the situation becomes pretty desperate as the film wears on. Towards the end, it veers off into slightly unusual territory in that somebody else arrives on the scene and appears to be giving Alice help. Or is she? This is where it drifts into the folk horror, because there's something very strange going on. We don't see what's going on with Alice. We never see Alice. We don't know what's happening to this woman who's offering to help her. But there's something going on with the body of this girl. And there's something going on with Alice and this new couple who've arrived. I really liked this. I thought this was very tense and very well done. But I think it fell a bit short at the end, because it is one where you think, well, what's happened exactly? Because it doesn't give you explanations or easy answers. You're left to think, well, what has happened here? I won't go into too much more detail, but certainly the first hour is very, very tense. And the acting from Matthew Rhys and Rosamund Pike, bearing in mind they're inside a car, is very, very good. And it's directed in a way that gives it a sense of unreality about it, because they're in a car driving through the countryside, but there's no sound in the car. Now, it could be it's an electric car, you wouldn't have much noise, but there's no sound of engines, or there's no exterior sounds. It's just these two in the car on the phone to this panicking daughter. Very, very clever, very atmospheric, but maybe doesn't quite stick the landing at the end. And the final film I watched this godforsaken month was one I was actually going to do an individual video for, but thought, I don't think I will, I'll just mention it at the end of the month. It's Anaconda, the 1997 adventure horror film, which was directed by Louis Liosa. This was a film I picked up a couple of months ago, you may remember, in one of my physical media updates, where I bought the Blu-ray. I think it was in a sale on Rarewaves for $5, and I hadn't seen it really since it was in cinemas, the only time I've seen it. And I felt like watching a creature feature, and this is really enjoyable. It's being remade, apparently. There's a new version coming out at Christmas with Jack Black and Paul Rudd. And I say it's a remake. I don't think it is a remake. I think it's actually inspired by this film, about this film production crew who go out to the jungle where the film was made, apparently. This is sort of similar in a way. This is about a documentary film crew who travel into the Amazon rainforest. During their journey, they come across a stranded snake hunter, played with his tongue not in his cheek but through it by Jon Voight. And as they get deeper into the Amazon, it becomes quite clear that he's not necessarily completely on their side, and he has his own agenda in relation to what's lurking in the water. This was actually good fun. I remembered it as being a bit campier than it actually is, but it's quite dark in some ways. It's quite intense and atmospheric. The scenes in the Amazon are very well done. It's very, get that sense of stifling oppression and vegetation and the forest and the jungle closing in on you. And there's some really good performances. This is the first time I became aware of J-Lo. Before she was J-Lo. Jennifer Lopez. She used to have a little, now she has a lot. She's very good in this film as the leader of this expedition, this film crew that's voyaged into this dark and bleak place. And she seems to be having a lot of fun with it. It's a good supporting cast. We have Owen Wilson, a very young Owen Wilson, and his girlfriend Carrie Wurra, who appeared in the Sliders TV series, and of course Eight-Legged Freaks, the horror film. And we have Jon Voight. We have the remarkable Jon Voight playing this snake hunter. And one of my main memories from the film really is the scene at the end of the film where, spoiler, his character gets devoured by the snake and then he's sort of regurgitated. I remember this scene in my head so clearly as like an extreme close-up of this quite good CGI snake coming up in front of the camera, and Jon Voight bursting out of the snake's mouth, and in the camera giving this theatrical and rather silly wink. That's not how it plays out. And in fact, that scene, which I'd remembered as sort of a silly comedy scene, is just a reference back to a character trait where his character would do this winky thing at people now and again. And in the film, he is regurgitated by the snake, but it's sort of a side view right in front of Jennifer Lopez, and he sort of winks at her and collapses. So it's not quite as, oh, come on, as I'd remembered it. And it just goes to show how the memory does cheat now and again. The film also stars, I did mention him earlier on, Ice Cube, much younger and much better in this film, playing Jennifer Lopez's assistant. It's good fun. I really enjoyed it. It's actually, I do like a monster film and I don't like snakes, so this was always going to work for me. And I'd give Anaconda a healthy 7.5 out of 10. That then, he said, looking at the list of films he's written down here, are the films I watched this month. We have The Roses, which is out in cinemas. I was going to see that today, Sunday, and then tag the review on at the end. I thought, well, I'll go and see it in the morning. The cinema will be quieter, and I like a quiet cinema, and I will talk about that in the next episode. So I hope you've enjoyed this little look back at the films I've watched this last month. It's been a mixed month of interesting films, particularly outstanding in the horror genre. I think horror is on a bit of a roll at the moment, particularly those films which aren't the dreary, boring, repetitive, quite nasty slasher films, which I have little time for, but things which have a bit more intellectualism about them, perhaps, if I can ascribe that to horror films. Anything that's got a bit more thought and a bit more imagination, and I think horror is coming up with the goods at the moment. And as I said, they tend to be low-budget films, so they tend to make a decent bit of money. We have more horror, I think, coming up. We've got Black Phone 2 coming out next month. I need to watch Black Phone, not Black Phone 1, the original Black Phone first, because I don't remember a lot about it, but it was very good. And of course, with Halloween, the Halloween season coming up, there'll be a lot more horror films coming up in the next few weeks. So it's going to be a horror film video at the end of next month. Sorry, I've had too much sugar. Right, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Come on. Subscriber numbers are just at the moment, and I need to go just because I'd like to get to 3,000 subscribers. I hope to get there for Christmas, but I don't think that's feasible because we're currently on around 2,650, and I think getting 350 before Christmas is going to be a bit of a push. However, if you would like to help me reach that number, all you have to do is click like and subscribe, or click on that QR code, and there we are, you're subscribed. It doesn't cost you anything, which is even better. Right, thank you for watching. I'll be back very soon with more stuff. Till I am back with more stuff, keep taking this stuff. I think I need to lie down.